figured that I would start off by talking about the top two items, which is what I've been talking a lot about. We were at the Township Committee meeting last night to present the annual operating budget. This year, obviously, we have a referendum moving forward, so I can spend some time on that, and then I can get into sort of what would have to happen in order for full-day kindergarten to come to fruition, and then take any questions. That was my plan of attack. And since you're newer to the district, some of you, I know some of you have kids in the district already, but I'll just kind of give a broad picture. New Jersey is one of only a few states where there are votes on school budgets. Most states and most districts in the United States do not have votes on school budgets. And New Jersey has sort of moved more in the direction of other states where there are no school budget votes. Right now, we're one of only 18 school districts in all of New Jersey out of over 500 that continue to have a vote on the budget. And there are lots of reasons for that, and we could debate that in lots of different directions, but suffice to say, our Board of Education continues to hold a budget vote. And out of the 35 districts in Morris County, the only other one that does that is Riverdale right now, which is up here. So that's the reason why on an annual basis I make lots of presentations and we talk so much about the budget, because if the budget is not voted up by the taxpayers, then the budget goes to the municipalities and they tell us how much we should cut, and we have to come up with that dollar amount and whittle down the budget. Generally speaking, we're limited now since 2010 to an increase in the tax levy of 2%. And as you, I'm sure, know, essentially all of our budget comes from the local tax base and not from other sources. So every year when we begin the budgeting process in mid-year, December, January, our Finance Committee of the board gives us direction. We set out goals and priorities. And this year, the priority, knowing that there was going to be a referendum put in front of the voters, was basically to not cut anything, not diminish any program, keep everything in place with respect to class sizes and programs, and then aim for the lowest possible cost to keep up a track record of efficiency. So every year we look at other school districts like us. There are three metrics here. One is the per pupil budgetary cost that the state publishes. The other is the percentage of your students, at least calculated over the total number of juniors and seniors who take an AP test. And then the third column is how many of your kids are still enrolled in post-secondary education 16 months after they graduate. And you can see, we look pretty good compared to most other school districts, and these are just some of the top. These are all outstanding, excellent school districts. So this is the cream of the crop, and even in the cream of the crop, we look pretty strong, and we look strong in spite of the fact that we're spending a little bit less money than most other districts, and all of the ones on this particular list. In Morris County, there are about a dozen or so K-12 school districts. So to compare apples to apples, if you look at the K-12 school districts in Morris County, similarly we spend toward the bottom on a per pupil basis. So our Board of Education is proud of that and tries to deliver as much value to the residents as it possibly can. This year, in terms of our budget, again, I'm sticking with the budget for now. We're not getting any more state aid than we got last year, and we're still getting much less state aid than we were getting 5 years ago. So the real crux of that, or the real implication there, is that we've made up the difference in state funding with local property taxes. Particularly in 2009-10, when funding was slashed by 87%. At that point, the board went to the public, and the public voted a budget that made up the difference, and it was a fairly sizable tax levy increase. We can go above the tax levy limit of 2% by about $183,000 this year, and that's because state health insurance rates have gone up, and the state kind of passes on to districts the ability to raise more in taxes if their own health insurance costs have gone up. So the maximum amount that our Board of Education could propose in the budget without having to ask a second question would be 2.3% this year. So 2.3% is the max that the board could go to. The last 2 years, the board was well above that, 3-4 and 3-3. And in part, that was because there were second questions that we put in front of the voters in each of those years. All 3 of those second questions passed, and the result was a 3.46 and a 3.34% tax levy.
So I have a quick question about that.
Yes.
Is that the 3 point whatever, is that year over year, or is that, and so is that like a total of 6% by the time you get to now, or is it over the
Yes.
same base?
No, it's
cumulative.
year over year.
Okay.
Cumulative. So this is just an overview of expenditures. That column all the way to the right, you can see the changes in expenditures. For the most part, you can see that we hover around 2%, except when you get to how much we're taking out of capital reserve or, well, primarily capital reserve.
And Mike,
Yep.
from seeing the presentation last year, the largest increases have typically been around employee benefits, right? Which is not.
Yes, largest increase has typically been around health insurance, employee benefits. This year, we actually have done much better than we've been doing in previous years, and we had a smaller increase in our health benefits than we've had in previous years. And then we've taken some other steps to freeze. Those benefits don't include only health insurance. There are some other things like tuition reimbursement and stuff for teachers. So that number has come in a little bit lower than it has. Same thing with special ed. That's been another driver. And this coming year, we're a little bit lower on the special ed side for a number of reasons, but we're trying to invest in our special ed program so that they're as diverse as possible, so that we can retain as many kids as possible in district, as opposed to placing them out of district. When we place a student out of district, the cost usually runs somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000. In some cases, it can be up to $200,000 to place a kid out of district, depending on the needs of the student. So this is just an overview of tax levy increase last year versus this year. And this slide also kind of shows that. So in the previous 2 years, if you look at the levy increase and the impact it had on borough and township homes at $100,000, or to use not an average, but just a round number, $700,000 home, you can see in the highlighted column that this year's budget is less in terms of impact. And that was deliberate. Obviously, the Board of Education is prioritizing this year investment in capital and investment in facilities. So the operating budget was set out to be leaner than in previous years without any kind of increase in programs. This was the year 2010-11 that I was just talking about with the dramatic loss of state aid. So at that time, the board went to the public to make up the difference in the loss of aid. That's why there was a 7.4% increase there. And you can see 1.77 in terms of the past 10 years is significantly less than the average over those 10 years. More of the same. So at the end of the day then, after this budget is presented in 3 weeks, next year, moving forward, however the budget vote or referendum vote goes, next year, regardless of this, the district will have more taxing authority because it didn't use the $183,000 in waiver amount that the state gave us. And the board also didn't go all the way up to the 2%. So the difference between that 2.3% max that the board could ask and the 1.77% is $313,801, and that just means that the board could ask that next year in taxing authority with its budget next year, or actually any of the following 3 years. And just keep that number in the back of your head.
And just to clarify, because I think that's a little bit of a hard subject, I mean, that's how last year when you used the second questions?
Second questions.
You used some of the bank cap, right?
Yes, but second questions, the banked cap enables you to put forward an amount, like let's say 2.5%,
yeah,
without a second question.
Okay.
A second question, you don't need banked cap to put in a second question. If a second question passes, though, it ends up exhausting or draining down your banked cap. So moving on to the referendum then. Needless to say, our school district has a lot of capital needs. The average age of our school buildings is 64 years. None of the buildings were built in the time the district was a district as we know it. All of them were built either when it was Chatham Borough or Chatham Township school districts. So our facilities are aging. We've addressed those aging facilities with other referenda in the past, and those referenda have focused on 3 areas primarily. First and foremost, classrooms. We've built somewhere between, by my estimate, 50 and 100 classrooms in the past 25 years. That was to house kids. Hi there. So our enrollment has gone up about 90% since the school district was formed. And those classrooms, the 50 to 100 classrooms that we built, have been used to house the students in the enrollment growth, primarily. In addition to that, we've invested in athletic facilities. So we've built 3 gymnasiums in the district, at the middle school at Washington Ave and at Southern Boulevard. And we've laid 2 new fields, Haas and Cougar, and resurfaced those fields last summer. And then all of the libraries in the schools are new, or at least remodeled, and they are good places to work. Over the past 10 years since the last referendum, all of our capital improvements have been accomplished via capital reserve, which is essentially a reserve account that we have at the end of each year that we can put money into if there's anything left from our budget. Enrollment has continued to go up. It's gone up over 25% since 2005, the time of the last referendum. And you'll notice from that second bullet that one of the areas absent from previous referenda areas of focus have been the arts facilities. So the genesis of this referendum has been the auditoriums. That is what the Board of Education and the administration have prioritized as a need, and it's 100% the driver behind the referendum. In part because the 2 auditoriums date to 1958 and 1976. If we had any athletic facility or school building that hadn't been invested in or refurbished or updated since those years, it wouldn't have, flown very long in this community. So our auditoriums now, we think, need to be addressed. We also believe that we need some more flexibility with respect to classrooms at the middle school. We have a growing STEM program. This year we've made investments in part because of the second question last year. So another goal was to free up some space at CMS for that. Obviously, the reason why some of you are here is because at the elementary level we've been tight on space. Last year when we first began, or you first began engaging us about full-day kindergarten, one of the issues that you all know is that we don't have space in our buildings. So this notion of building more classrooms would address what we need right now and then give us hopefully flexibility down the road to make other kinds of considerations. And then we have athletic facilities that are also aging. I don't need to tell any of you that if you've been to Cougar Weekend at any point. And then we currently right now are situated out here, about 3 miles away from most of our school buildings. And we rent this facility. It's not an ideal setup for us, so we'd like to incorporate our offices into the center of the district. So to try to hit those goals or address them, you're familiar, I think, with the 6 projects that are going to be included in the referendum. There'd be a new auditorium built at CMS. We would take the current CMS auditorium and convert it into classrooms and offices. We'd renovate the high school auditorium. We would build 6 elementary classrooms net in the district in 2 of our schools. We'd install turf behind CHS and also grade and level out that field. And then we would upgrade what we have at Cougar so that it's a little bit more safe and user-friendly. So just a couple of points. We looked first actually at expanding the high school auditorium. That was our initial goal. We evaluated a bunch of different options to try to do that last year. It really was not feasible from a cost perspective and even from an operating perspective in some cases. What I mean by that is if we were going to try to knock down that auditorium, we'd have to take out a whole bunch of classrooms for some period of time, probably a couple of years, That's not something that we have the ability to do right now. If we stay within the footprints then, and the middle school is the same story. We have classrooms and other spaces around the middle school auditorium, makes it too difficult to just expand. So if we stay within the footprints of the auditoriums, we lose seating because we have to come up to ADA compliancy, and we don't address other needs that we want to address in those spaces, such as the inadequate storage that we have, the lack of a dedicated space for building sets, dressing rooms, other kinds of issues. And the feeling on the board, there are plenty of folks I understand in town who argue that we should just stay within the footprints and remodel the spaces in a comprehensive fashion and forget about some of this stuff. The feeling on the board and the feeling administratively is if we build auditoriums once every 50 years or so in this town, we should do it right. We should try to capture maximum flexibility and seating capacity, and that's the reason in part that we're moving forward with a question for a new auditorium. So renovating, we can do it in a cheaper way, but we don't think it will give us a superior product at the end of the day. In terms of converting roughly half of the current auditorium into STEM lab space, as I said, we're diversifying our program. If any of you have kids at the elementary schools right now, they're being exposed once a week to design and technology class. We've gotten a lot of good feedback about that class. They're moving into Lafayette, where we're doing the same, and we've gotten a lot of good feedback about what we're doing there. And then we're hitting the middle school, and we kind of, at least from a facilities perspective, slide back a little bit in terms of the flexibility that we have. And then we get up to the high school. We just finished our high school addition. We're currently furnishing the addition. And we're going to bring on another tech lab up there, and we have room or flexibility to do even more. So next year we're actually going to have 6 dedicated technology lab spaces at the high school. So we want to kind of plug that gap at the middle school. The elementary schools, again, if you've got kids, especially at Washington Avenue, you know that those buildings are tight. Athletics, I don't think to go through all of this, so I will just mention quickly, our fastest growing sports by far and away are our running sports. Spring track right now, we've got over 220 kids, I think, which is 20% of the high school population running. Cross country, same thing. So we want to try to invest a little bit in those opportunities. And I know that there's a youth running program now that's booming in Chatham. So the total cost of the referendum then is $24.8 million. The state has signed off on providing us with 2.9 of that million, of that number, and then the local share would be 21.9. We've also just finished refunding our current debt. Those new payments are going to kick in about a year from now or so, I believe. And then we've got some operating cost savings that we think we will derive from moving these offices that we're standing in closer to or onto school property. So, kind of putting all that into the mix to give a comparison. Because the interest rates are so low, one of the reasons the board is moving in this direction with the referendum, the tax impact is significantly less than it had been 10 years ago for similar projects. If you sub out the auditoriums or the gymnasiums for the auditoriums, you can see a lot of similarity between the two referenda. And yet, on the other end of the chart, the tax impact is not as significant as it was a decade ago. For the tax impact in terms of households, $100,000 or $700,000, and then annual and monthly, you can see what the impact would be. And when you combine this with the 1.77% tax levy increase, the feeling on the Board of Education is that it's a reasonable ask, and it does not depart very wildly from previous asks of the community just on the operating budget side. Just some logistical issues, I'll just hit this very quickly. The location should not be an issue long-term, having the primary performing arts space at the middle school. All of our high school athletes practically right now, bless you, we practice and play and compete off-site All the females, or most of the females, they do that at the middle school. All of our fencers are down at the middle school, so we don't see a big issue there. And building at the circle is actually much less disruptive to us than building onto a building, because we don't have to take any classrooms out offline for any period of time. We think we'll improve the aesthetics of the middle school and its facade, and timeline is something we would have to develop, but we would want to make sure that we've got flexibility with respect to at least one performing arts space as we go through construction. If you're not registered, you only have a few days left. And now into full day kindergarten. So first let me say, and I've said this to people in this room, I'm a supporter of full day kindergarten. I'm an educator. I believe in my heart that the more time we have with kids as a school district, the more we can do for kids and the better the outcomes will be. So I like more school. I like a longer school day. I like a longer school year. I like more time for kids to be in school. Many of you know there's a movement, you know, in many other nearby states, not just to go full day kindergarten, but go full day pre-K. So there's no need to persuade me personally. I don't speak for the Board of Education when I'm saying this, or every parent in the district, but most educators that I know, every superintendent I know, we believe in as robust an experience for our youngest learners as we can possibly have. In New Jersey, as of the fall anyway, those were the numbers about districts that have full day kindergarten, which ones have half day, and which ones offer an option to parents. In Chatham, we have not had full day kindergarten, as you know. We have some constraints that some other districts that I'm aware of do not have or have not had, and in particular, I converse with other superintendents nearby and other superintendents in the county. I know a number of them, a number of other districts have had more flexibility with space. They've either had enrollment decline or they began with more buildings than we have initially, so they've had extra classrooms to work with. Even out where I live in Chester, where there is full day kindergarten, enrollment has gone down, and a number of communities out there have experienced the same. We also, you know, that have that low per pupil spending amount, and it's important to understand kind of the pluses and minuses of being really efficient and, you know, what that means. So on the one hand, these charts, you know, show that Chatham there's good value in Chatham, I think, or at least that's one way to interpret a chart like this. The other way to interpret the chart is to think about why is it, you know, what's missing, or what is it that the other districts have that make their per pupil cost a little bit higher. So class size is one very obvious thing. Having lower class sizes costs more money because you have to hire more staff, plain and simple. Having more school buildings, so there's one place on this list that has about the same enrollment we do, but instead of 6 school buildings, I think they have 8 or 9. Right? It's more expensive to operate more school buildings. Now that, in some ways, makes it, it gives the ability to have more schools that are centered in communities, so there's less travel and so forth. But it might not make it more efficient. I don't know which, you know, I don't know if every one of these schools has full day kindergarten. I know some of them don't, but full day kindergarten is another example. It's more expensive to have full day kindergarten, and you're going to have probably a slightly higher per pupil budgetary cost because you're going to have more staff. So the point is only that in a 2% cap world, districts that have been lean over the years tend to have less flexibility. So if we were spending 18 grand a year, like one of the school districts on the list, there might be more flexibility for us on a per pupil basis to make decisions about how we're allocating resources. There's a little less flexibility if we're further down on the chart in terms of per pupil spending. Okay, so some of the requirements. So we'll go through what would kind of have to happen for us to get to full day kindergarten here. And again, I'm saying that although I support full day kindergarten and more time with kids, I don't speak for members of the Board of Education. I don't, you know, make every decision in the district, just the snow day decisions. So the first thing that would have to happen is we need space. we 100% need space. There are really two ways to get to space. One is to build. The second way is to have a drop-off in enrollment. We've had demographic reports for 3 years running now, maybe even 4, that call for a decline in enrollment, and they have not come to fruition. We have not had a decline in enrollment. This year we are up versus the demographic report. Next year will be the same because our kindergarten registration is about where it was last year at this time, even though it was supposed to be significantly reduced. So if we had more space, and if we had even a modest decline or a plateauing of enrollment, it would enable consideration of something like full-day kindergarten. Then, after the space, we've got costs. So, what are the costs associated with full-day kindergarten? So the first is capital. $3.3 million in this referendum goes to building classrooms. And all of the new classrooms proposed in the referendum contain bathrooms. That's essentially a requirement for kindergarten. We can also convert current classrooms by building a bathroom inside of a classroom if we needed to. That is not obviously as costly as building a new classroom. So there are two ways to kind of make it happen. And you can see that if you've got an enrollment decline, then you free up a classroom or two. You can convert one fairly easily into a kindergarten-ready classroom. And then there are operating expenses like staffing, transportation, materials, and supplies. So let me just kind of get to some of those. Right now, the estimate, I think a reasonable estimate would be that we would need 7 additional classroom teachers to run full-day kindergarten. That assumes that we've got 2 full-time kindergarten teachers now in each building. That number can vary up or down depending on how many sections we have. But a reasonable estimate would be that we would need 7 classroom teachers. We'd probably need some additional staffing in special ed or maybe BSI. And we would probably have an increase in related services, such as occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech, and that kind of thing. So just as like a ballpark estimate, if we were talking about 7 teachers, on the low end, if we budgeted 80 per teacher, and 80 per teacher takes into account the health insurance for those teachers. On the higher side, like family health plans, you're probably somewhere in that range. Oops. Transportation would probably go down because we don't have to run a bus route in the middle of the day, which we do now for some of our buildings, and that would be a savings. And then somewhere in the neighborhood of $10,000 to $15,000 per classroom, because we put a smartboard in, we put a projector, we have obviously furniture, tables, that kind of thing, books, all that stuff. So somewhere in that neighborhood. So if you add, well, let me get to the next slide, or a couple slides. If you add all this together, you're probably in the $1 million range or so.
Excuse me, Mike. This is on the basis of 25 kids per class?
A maximum, I'd say a max. Maximum 25 kids per class, which is what we have now, but in kindergarten we also have paraprofessional support. So then after that, so if we came up with the space and the money, space, money, then what would have to happen? Space, money, then we would need the Board of Education to approve of this or to incorporate it somehow into the program. Let me just see so there would be a couple of things. So you get the Board of Education approval, the majority of the board. If that were to happen, then the board would have to find a way to pay for the full-day kindergarten. And by my reckoning, maybe there are some other ways, but I thought of 4 principal ways that would happen. The first would be to reappropriate current operating funds. Okay, so the way that would probably work would be if tuition started to decline and we had a teacher or 2 in each elementary school that we didn't need anymore. So like Lafayette Avenue School this year, for example, going into next, we're going to lose a teacher out of Lafayette Avenue School.
So not tuition, enrollment.
Correct, enrollment. So that just simply means we can, instead of paying for 3 second-grade teachers, because we don't need them moving into the following year, you say we're paying for 3 kindergarten teachers, and you move those second-grade teachers into kindergarten, you've reappropriated where the dollars are going on a grade level basis and where the teaching staff is. Okay. Second way would be to use banked cap. So when I had that little thing that said, remember that number, next year we'll have $300,000 of banked cap. If you go back to this number, 300 is a big chunk of 560 or 800. Just to say that if the board used banked cap for this, and I'm saying if, I'm not saying the board is, has agreed to it, but if the board were to want to use banked cap for full day kindergarten, it would not entail a second question, right? So it's a second way to pay for kindergarten. Third way is a second question. Just give it to the community. Try to persuade enough people in the community that it's worth having full day kindergarten and get the vote approved. And then the fourth way would be a tuition-based program, which I'm sure some of you are familiar that there are other districts that have done that kind of thing. And again, I'll just as an example, there are a couple of districts nearby that charge about $5,000 per kid. If you had 100 people willing to pay $5,000, again, you're getting real close to the $560,000, $800,000 amount.
And would a tuition-based program include exemptions for low-income families, like waivers in appropriate circumstances?
I believe it would have to.
Yeah, I don't.
100%. Because to me, the biggest argument for full-day kindergarten, from my perspective, this is just me talking, is equity. It has to do with equity. It has to do with kids who don't have access to those kinds of experiences and that kind of educational, experience. The biggest argument against it that I hear, and I understand it, is that probably every person in this room, whether we offer a half-day program or zero kindergarten, is then satisfying their children's needs by reading to them and taking them to the playground to socialize with other kids and to have other experiences like going to museums or zoos or whatever. The point being that kids who are disadvantaged are going to get the most out of expanding what you're doing early on. So one of the ways that I kind of think about this is it's a lot easier to get to the 1 million, and there are a lot more ways to get to the 1 million, whether it's a combination of a second question and enrollment decline and a tuition-based program initially. I'm not saying that that would be the menu, but there's a lot. It's easier to get to the 1 million than it is to get to 3.3 and build. So it would be good, it would be better for us in terms of being able to consider expanding programs like full-day kindergarten if we had more space. And that's the reason this is in the referendum. That's one of the reasons this is in the referendum.
Is the second point the conversion of the Southern Boulevard classrooms in the referendum, or just the 6? 6 new classrooms?
Right, the 6 new classrooms in the referendum are only in Milton and Washington.
Correct. And the second point is not in the referendum, or
correct, it's not in the referendum.
It's not, because
not
that
in
was,
the referendum.
Okay.
It was initially considered for the
right,
referendum.
and then they
It
were
was,
pulled.
yeah. So the referendum was trimmed in
Correct.
kind of each area. I just put this in here to say that since we're not building new at Southern Boulevard, there are 4 or 5 classrooms there now that have bathrooms. I feel like maybe it's 3 or 4. It's our 2 kindergarten rooms. I think there's a third one and another one. But in any case, the point being simply that even if we pulled a couple of programs out of Southern and moved them to Milton, we still have to deal with the bathroom issue at some point if we went with full day.
So Mike, even though the kindergarten enrollment hasn't declined overall this year and is on par over prior year, is it less at Southern Boulevard? Are we seeing a decline in the population at Southern Boulevard?
It depends on what number you're measuring, you're starting with. So like, in 2nd grade right now, in 6th grade, 5th grade, and I think it's 2nd grade, we have about 350 kids in a class. In 1st grade, in kindergarten right now, we have about 240, and in 1st grade we have about 290. So we're down off of the highs. At least 3 of 4 years we were up at 350.
Right.
Now we're down right at 300 or maybe a little bit below. So Southern is a place where we lost a section moving into this year. We're planning on losing another section next year. So we're down from the highs, but we're not down to where the demographer said we would be.
I saw that that's basically two options. We get full day kindergarten or maybe tuition based. And I was wondering if you ever thought about a third option. My sister lives in a town where the kids go to full day kindergarten just 2 days a week. So like half the class goes to full day kindergarten 2 days a week, and the other class gets to a full day kindergarten 2 days a week. Would that help us, like maybe in the meantime, get to the goal? If we have a classroom issue or size issue, space, like can we send them? If that, it seems like that might be a third option to consider, or does it not solve the problem?
In some ways, that's a question for you, probably.
Yeah.
I think that would be we could consider that now. That's not been something that I've heard an interest in, but would that be better for you guys?
I think in the gap, I mean, when you look at our town, it may not be ideal or the end goal, but if you look at parents in town, most parents are sending their kids somewhere for wraparound 2 to 3 days a week. So there's also, from what we've heard from our base, some parents who don't necessarily support full day kindergarten because they feel like it's too much 5 days a week. They may be very open to seeing this 2 or 3 days a week to ramp their kids up to go to first grade. Because that's the biggest, I would say, piece of feedback that we get. Even when parents are hesitant about full day kindergarten, it's when they get to first grade, that's a really big jump to go from, 2 hours and 40 minutes or 2 hours and 50 minutes to then going to a 6-hour day. So if we have this space for that, then I would certainly, I don't think anybody in this room would say turn down, going 2 days or 3 days so that everybody got some shot. And in many ways, I think, I don't want to speak for everybody, but if our options were tuition-based versus going 2 days, we might vote for everybody to get the opportunity to go 2 or 3 days so everybody's on the same.
What's good feedback? I thought I interpreted your question as meaning, do you scrap AM, PM now and do 2 days and a half day? And that's something that I haven't heard before, and I don't know how convenient that would be or how well it would tie into the wraparound. If it's more of the hybrid of you get AM every day, but 2 of the days you extend, then you're right. That's definitely it would save money and knock down some of the staffing and other costs that we have with that.
I mean, I think what I would say is we would welcome discussion again about the creative options that we might explore for what we could do. Because the last discussion that we had about options, of all or nothing was, we talked about a pilot, there wasn't space, we weren't moving forward with a pilot, and then there was no further discussions. But if it looks like next year there are some demographic changes and availability to get it in before these 6 classrooms are built in some way, shape, or form, other people in the room can speak, but.
Well, I was gonna ask about the potential for a pilot program. If there's space, if you're seeing that you're drafting a section at Southern, even if it's only, like one section where the day is extended, is that something that you would consider doing in order to gather data on whether or not full day kindergarten is even beneficial?
Yeah, I think for a pilot, we're probably a year off. I wouldn't say September. And when I throw that number around at Southern, or the extra classroom, we have one of our grade levels in Southern right now. I think it's first grade, if I'm not mistaken. We have 4 sections, I believe, at about 24. We're planning on holding to that. If we get 7 kids moving in the summer, we're not going to be able to hold to that, and we're going to have to open up another section of first grade. So there's, budgeted wise, we have a decline of a staff member. If we have to go to another section, then we don't, that doesn't happen. So I think we're a year out on a pilot, but that's a definite consideration, would be a pilot.
I think we're doing our children a disservice by even sending them to half-day kindergarten. My name's Amy Wagner. I'm a full-time attorney in the area. My husband works full-time. I'm president of Chattanooga Commerce and Social Club. People move to this community because of the education that we offer here. I don't know that there's statistics out there about how well prepared our children are going from kindergarten to first grade, but I don't think they're very well prepared. My children, since the age of 12 weeks, have been in full day, either preschool or something because of our work schedule. So when my son went to half-day kindergarten at Washington Avenue, he had Mrs. Volker, who everybody raves about, and she's wonderful. But she's limited in what she's capable of doing in a matter of 3 hours. So halfway through the year, I had my child in tutoring for reading because he wasn't learning to read, even though I'm an attorney and I read to him all the time, but I'm not a trained educator. Then he had to go to brain camp. Has there been any statistics about how many children have come through the kindergarten program that are going to brain camp that then succeed after brain camp? My child's excelling in reading now after having gone to brain camp. He's doing really well in first grade. So my daughter's about to go into kindergarten, and I've now made different arrangements for her. She is going to go to half-day kindergarten, but I'm now making sure she goes to a program where she's going to continue getting kindergarten and not just daycare for the rest of the day, because I don't think they're learning in that 3-hour window. So I just think that there needs to be some sort of study. I know we don't do testing of them, but I think the community needs to understand that, you know, we're practically throwing our money away even on half-day kindergarten. It's important that they get that education. It's not about just putting them in a place for the whole day. It's about teaching them for a full day.
Well, of course, I agree with you.
And having that consistency, and not jumping from one program to another.
Of course, I agree with you. I mean, if I had if money was no issue and Bill Gates was giving us $100 million and we had all the space that we need, we wouldn't be having this discussion right now. In terms of statistics, our kids who pass through brain camp do very well long term. The first year we start any kind of standardized testing, as you know, is third grade. Our kids do great. That's one of the lines of argument of the people who oppose full-day kindergarten, is that my kid went through half-day kindergarten, my kid is doing great, my kid is in such and such college now, I don't think we need full-day kindergarten. So of course, we want Nancy Volker to be able to do twice as much as she currently can do with her kids, because she's terrific at what she does.
She's
and we think that kids will be better off if they had twice as much Nancy Volker in a day.
My concern I think this is, in terms of like options, it's really good to keep other strategies on the table, but my concern is if we start talking about all these sort of plan Bs, we're going to lose the focus on plan A, which is getting full day kindergarten 5 days a week. And I think that the more we invest in alternative solutions that for anything other than a very, very short-term period, like a transitional period, we do ourselves a disservice in the long run. Because I don't want then the community, people who already may oppose the investment in full day kindergarten, say, well, look, you've already got 2 more days a week than you had, you know, in the past. So I think in terms of strategy, it's really, keep your eyes on the prize for this group in terms of focus on the 5, the ultimate goal. If that falls short, maybe the referendum won't pass, and so that whole foundation for the classroom space is essential. Maybe let's at least see where we get there. But I think, in terms of we just should stay focused on a long-term strategy, and while keeping Plan Bs in mind, not go too far down that road when we still need to focus.
Can I ask you, if the referendum does pass, what would be the timeline for the build and then the next steps, and how long you think it would take to actually implement full day kindergarten?
If the referendum were to pass, we would, at that point, engage the architect in much more detailed design for the additions. Then we'd have to go out to bid. Based on what has happened at the high school, the guess would be the elementary classrooms would be ready either January or let me just think. Right, September 16 would probably be the earliest, or January 17th, I would guess. Probably. I mean, a year and a half would be probably a very aggressive timeline.
Okay.
If I'm
And you
right on the year.
consider operating it, going, to vote on the operating expenses for full day kindergarten before they're built, or do they have to be built? So are we another April out after those?
Yeah,
It
are we
would
looking
depend
at
on,
the 17th or April 16th?
It would depend probably in part on what the plan or the option for paying for it was, which one was selected. So if it was a second question, the classrooms have to be ready to rock, like you, because if you ask a second question, you have to implement the second question. If it's a different kind of version of what we're talking about, then it's a little, then the bigger question probably is less, are the classrooms 100% ready, and more, what's the risk to parents who have to start choosing full-day programs or wraparounds or whatever in January, February, and however, that timeline goes.
Question, if the second question wouldn't pass in theory, would there also be the option for parents to select a tuition-based program? My son is in CHIP, by luck of the lottery, pay the tuition, fantastic program. I don't see anybody opposed to if the second question doesn't pass the tuition-based funding that as well.
The only rule that I'm aware of with the second question, if it fails, is that the district then can't pay for that the following year. I don't know. I'd have to do a little research about districts that have been in a position where they asked a second question and it failed, and whether or not, it could well be that this has never happened. That then the parents picked up the tab for whatever the program was.
Hi, I'm Nabil Mouli and I have a third grader, and I agree with you. I think it's a disservice to keep half the kindergarten. We had wraparound programs, and when she got to first grade, there were some kids who were more advanced, and she was holding them back. And there were other kids who were less advanced because they have different experiences. So I think the added benefit that's not mentioned here by having the universal program, well, universal, that every kid has that opportunity, is it's much easier for a teacher to pull everybody up when everybody comes at the same level. So I'm a strong proponent for that. When Dr. Lasusa, when you mentioned people opposing, and I have some friends who are opposing, or described as being opposing kindergarten. They don't oppose kindergarten. They oppose paying for it. So they all understand that there are academic value, and I think that's where I hope the debate's going to be, that we agree that that's what we should be offering our kids. Having that within the structure of the public school is much easier for everybody to organize, for our teachers to give a full experience. And then, as adults, we can discuss how to pay for that. Is it paid through the collective tax or paid through the private tuitions? And I think all those options should be open for discussion. So that's my first point, and I would encourage all of us in the community to keep mind open about how to pay for it. And if we establish that having it is important, how to pay for it is a question of how do we do that. My second point is those other needs that Dr. Lasusa is mentioning will still be there. BSI, for those of you who don't know, is basic skill instructions. So some of your kids will need those basic skill instructions. And they will need to be in that classroom with not two other teachers teaching the other kids. So I don't think, my perspective is we should not dismiss those needs. They are very important. And if they are competing with full day kindergarten, and if what we want is to give a good education for our kids, is, well, let's put everything on the table. And if we have to pay for that BSI class and for full day kindergarten instruction, let's do it. Let's not piecemeal and bring these initiatives one after the other. So that leads us to, I think, we would bring, very good value to our communities. We put all of those needs, and some of them when your kids get older and have high schooler and have middle schoolers, there are other needs there. My point is we should put all those needs on the table and put together some kind of a plan that highlights, yes, all these needs, the fact that we have next generation science standards coming through, and those will require more labs for your kids when they get to middle school and high school. There are other competing needs about the funding for the teachers and their retirement and other things. So my point is, let's not just take pieces of what our community needs and bring this discussion, as a community dialogue to say, okay, this is what we want for our community, and then we decide how to pay for it. My last question, if I may, if the referendum doesn't pass, what's the next option? What's the next opportunity to bring another version of this project or something else for the community to decide on?
If the referendum were not to pass, the next opportunity to ask a different referendum would be September. That's something that is entirely of the board's discretion.
Okay.
The dates are September, I believe December, actually November, those who have November votes. And I think if you don't have a November vote, you can do November. December is another date, March, April.
So 6 months from now.
Can I ask a question? I get it's a big change moving from half-day kindergarten, full-day kindergarten. But at each of the elementary schools, has there been any research done into a dedicated, because I'm guessing that kindergarten enrollment is more volatile than any of the other grades, meaning you have a pretty good idea how many first graders move into second grade, how many, doing the construction or whatever investment needs to be done one time as to centralized kindergarten so that you have the flexibility, because when you distribute out among the different elementary school sites, you lose flexibility. So if you consolidated the kindergarten experience, whether that be full day, teachers, et cetera, into a single location, it's not like Chatham is this enormous community where you now are in the car for 45 minutes. Bringing kindergartners together before the elementary school experience, has there been any research into that?
We've considered that. It wouldn't be probably kindergarten alone, it would be more like an early elementary building where we have pre-K and CHIP with kindergarten, maybe first grade. There are other implications to doing that. The first is obviously we have to find property and we'd have to build.
Right here.
But we don't own this property.
Oh, right.
We rent this property, and this property, it's not ours to begin with, but even beyond that, if we went to acquire it for however much the market, rate is, there's a lot of work that has to happen in this building. Anyway, one issue is cost. The other issue is the redistricting that would probably cause. I mean, it would probably force us to map the neighborhood schools. We've also looked at, going K-5 at 4 different buildings instead of having, a 4-5 building. There are implications to that too with redistricting. Redistricting is very, very controversial among parents and communities. So the short answer is yes, we've looked at some of those options, and there are distinct advantages to having sort of like an early childhood center. You can do a lot more multi-age kind of grouping, and other communities certainly have that model in place, but we haven't, due to some other issues, we haven't gone in that direction.
My final question is, has there been any looking into how much you would save on BSI services if you provided full-day kindergarten? It was my understanding that there's a certain amount of first graders that are requiring a lot of BSI services that might not if they learned how to read in kindergarten or learned how to do some of those things in kindergarten, and then maybe the need for that wouldn't be as great.
Yeah, I don't know how to quite measure that. I think it's a dangerous line to go down to think that if you have full-day kindergarten, every kid's going to know how to read by the end of kindergarten, because that's not going to happen, I can tell you, and it shouldn't happen. It's not appropriate, it's not developmentally appropriate to expect every kindergartner to be reading by the time they're done. So I don't know how to demonstrate that we would have a reduction in BSI or special services or whatever, but I would never make the argument that putting in full-day kindergarten is going to mean that all of our kids are reading by the time they get to first grade, or that in first grade they're able to do more accelerated mathematics. That's really, I don't think that's the point. That's not the benefits of kindergarten really aren't that, from my point of view, especially in a community like this. So I'd be leery about that.
I just have a couple of points. I think I agree with a number of comments that I've been in the community now 11 years. I have 2 kids that are in middle school. My last one's going to kindergarten. This is not an issue that's going to benefit me at all. But I think it's important to remain focused on the one issue that the community does deserve and need full-day kindergarten. And it's going to be another clearly 12 to 18 months before that happens. And we need to continue to be engaged as a group. What happens in this community as your kids age to different spaces, your needs become what you want your kids to have. And then this full-day kindergarten group waters down to only those people that will be directly benefited. So I'm committed and I'm here because it's important for the community, and my last child will not benefit from it. In 10 years, this has been talked about ad nauseum in mothers groups and whatnot that I've been here. This is the first time that I've been here in 10 years that it's even a glimmer of hope because of the classroom additions to the referendum. I'm sorry that the other two got knocked down, and I'm hopeful that with conversion at Southern, if 8 is the magic number to move forward, that stays, that remains. And my concern is a bait and switch situation. I know how crazy the classes are and how busy it is in the school, and I guarantee what the superintendent says, that the principals can find 1,001 other purposes for those rooms, is absolutely correct. And in a second, there will be projects that should have that space because we're tight. I don't assume that enrollment numbers are gonna go down. I think that's a pipe dream. So I think we should look at, you know, what we can do to pass a referendum like this and work to continue to work with Dr. LaSousa. If you're on our side and you believe it's happened, there's a community out there that needs to be convinced that it needs to happen. So what can we do in the next 12 and 18 months to say, we're built? If the referendum for now moving to a full day kindergarten is the best next step, because that means implementation has to happen by the next fall. That's the, you know, that's the quickest road. Road B would be alternative 2 or 3, you know, to get it paid for. It's a money issue, and it's almost like we're on the verge of making some of this happen. So we should support this to make it happen and get you guys, let's get building so that we can have viable conversations to making this a reality. If it's not built, it's not a reality. I mean, it's not. You know, so we need to focus on that now and make sure we can continue to keep that going. That's my opinion.
And I appreciate that, because I think one of the things, Mike, that, you know, we hear coming out as part of the referendum, and I think it's relevant to full day kindergarten, which is the board's made a decision that this is what's best for the community. I mean, we elected these people, they have the information, they've evaluated it, and they've studied it. I mean, one of the things that we continue to hear from full day kindergarten is that there's people who don't really believe in it because their kids didn't go through it. Well, you guys know what the curriculum is down the path. You know what's expected in first grade. I now see it, I have a kindergartner. You know, and it's way, way different than what it was before. I certainly wasn't adding, I certainly wasn't subtracting, I certainly wasn't writing a sentence. And so I think that there's a level of, you know, from a curriculum standpoint, you know, the board has told us that they believe in the value, that they don't need to be convinced it's necessary, but they're falling back at times on, well, the public isn't really that supportive on this. Well, I think at some level we have, the board and you and us, have to come out and, you know, make the decision that this is what's necessary and sell it. You know, and I think that that's, to me, a next step that we have to take once these rooms are built, because, you know, I think, you know, Julie and I are committed to this, whether our kids are benefiting or not committed to this, so we're not going away. But, you know, I've even heard from the other extreme, from like naysayers on the curriculum standpoint, which is part of the reason they don't want full day kindergarten is they're not convinced that what's happening in the 2.5 hours is necessarily the right curriculum. So they're, or even other extreme, get rid of the half-day period because all they're learning is in the afternoon at other, and I'm not saying these are my views, I'm saying this is what we hear as feedback, what they're actually learning is in the wraparound from Methodist or from New Providence or from the other places. So, you know, if we're not going to have something that's really of value in that space, which we're not required from the space, it either, you know, we need to have something of value, or, you know.
Well, 2 things real quick.
What are we doing?
What's going on in the 2.5 hours is aligned to the Common Core. It's principally devoted to mathematics and language arts instruction, and it's valuable and it's good. Would it be better if there was more? Would it be better if we could do music and art? I can't, you know, possibly argue otherwise. I report to the Board of Education. I think the Board of Education, as you've heard, like people in the community, like people at this table, have mixed feelings about kindergarten, but cost is the issue that the board has cited. Cost is, and it's the space and it's operating. Those are the 2, you know, the 2 monkeys that have to be wrestled down. The board, whether the board has taken a step with this toward the space, and that doesn't mean that the board has committed to going forward with full kindergarten, adult day kindergarten once the space is built. But it is a necessary first step. If the referendum fails, obviously that will delay the possibility of more space. At a minimum, it will delay it. And I can tell you definitively that the priorities in the referendum are the two auditorium structures and addressing them. And that will happen before any of the other items, most likely. So whether I don't know what the board will do if the referendum fails. I don't know if they're gonna go, huddle up and come back 1 year from now. I don't know if it would be September. I don't know if we're not gonna go with, we've put a lot of work into this, we're not gonna go forward with any referendum, and we're just gonna slowly peel these projects off over the next 10 years via the capital reserve account. I can't, predict that.
If the referendum fails, and I clearly hear that the performing arts facility is number one, could you go back in September? This is your crystal ball, might the referendum reappear in September for the performing arts facility with the other tangential things pared down, at which point, classrooms get, we'll make do, and, you deal with the crazy
I wouldn't feel
sports
comfortable
people.
trying to predict. I wouldn't feel comfortable trying to predict.
I mean, that would be a concern I think we should be clear, we should be aware of, because, there are priorities, and look, the classrooms are getting thrown into a referendum to our benefit, and the referendum, the gorilla is here and we're getting in there, so I would, at this point, want to support it to go with it, so that we can move this agenda forward if you're solely looking at this agenda item.
I think this is misleading to say that the other has to go first. What has to go first is what the community wants to go first. Our representatives are there to represent us, and if we think that it is a better project for the community not to spend money on the gorilla and spend it on full-day kindergarten, they will listen. There are reasonable people who will listen if we bring a case. And Dr. De Sousa is going to do whatever the Board of Education is, he says it time and again. It's up to us to decide whether that is a priority for our community or it is not. So I don't think it's a good representation of what's going to happen if this referendum fails, and if we are constructive enough and we build our case that priority number one are the classrooms and the fields, and then the community does not believe that building a 1,000-seat theater is educational value for the community, they will do it. It's not.
Hold on, let me just, that's incorrect, Dr. Bill. The community elects the board.
Yeah.
The board then represents the community and makes decisions based on what the board thinks is critical or essential. So if the board and the administration, when I say the auditoriums are the priority, that's based on our discussions and our assessments of those facilities. And what I mean is not to say that the board is just going to ask, the same referendum 50 times over the next, 10 years. What I mean to say is we have to address the asbestos in the middle school. That is a priority. That has to happen. We have to deal with the condition of the high school auditorium. And I can tell you, unless the whole full board changes, which it's not because no one's running, there's an unopposed election, those items are going to take priority over the other items that are listed. That's all that I mean.
But that could be remediation, you don't mean that a new building is the priority.
I didn't say that.
Addressing.
I didn't say that.
I just wanted to clarify
I
that.
said that the condition of those two spaces are, so my point was just simply that I don't know if the board is going to go forward with another referendum, to your point.
Right.
What I do know is that one way or the other, we have to invest money, whether it's through capital reserve, whether it's shutting down one of the auditoriums for a year and saying all the money we're going to save in capital reserve this year, we're going to take that 1.2 million and throw it into this auditorium. That I think I can safely say that based on discussions that we've had internally and via the board, that the single greatest concern, the driver behind the referendum, has been the condition of the two auditoriums.
And I think it's reasonable, and everybody in the community believes that. And all of those who oppose the new building, they say we need to fix the current theaters and not spend that, $10 additional million on that, but spend it on classes and stuff like that. But again, this is one opinion, and there are very respectable and friends that I have that say, no, we need a new big 1,000. I disagree, but.
I just want, if we assume for a moment that the referendum passes and we're getting to the next step of this big open debate of all these constituencies wanting their hands on the new classroom. It's been a very open public process of many rounds of public comment on the referendum, and what's unclear to me is the process and what voice we'd have in it for how those classrooms get used, because obviously there's existing programs that are overcrowded or need more space and resources, and to what extent could principals simply rush in to fill that vacuum of these 6 brand new classrooms without having to go through any sort of public process. I'm very curious as to what voice and how do we best marshal our resources to have a voice in that allocation process if we, let's, again, assuming the referendum passes and those 6 new classrooms are available. What's the public process, if any? And I think I understand that a precursor to getting full day K funded was it would probably have to be a second question because of the additional funds involved. So that would have to be a step, obviously, and that would be a public process. But what else can happen? I mean, I just kind of see a lot of stuff probably going on behind the scenes for principals to just rush in there with their existing programs, which are legitimate. I'm not questioning their needs. They will have legitimate needs. So can you explain what the process will look like?
I think you're spot on, and I would say absolutely that administratively, the folks who are being paid to figure out how to run their buildings are the ones who have that authority. And every year, like right now, we've got classrooms that we're planning on changing their function for next year because of shifts in our programs. We have high school that just had an addition completed, and we're moving people from one end of the building to the other, and all of that kind of thing. So the internal machinations of how buildings are scheduled and laid out are administrative. Right. I think that when you get to the real issue of introducing a new program or expanding the existing program, specifically kindergarten, number one, the presence at the board meetings, my relaying to the board these kinds of conversations, if there is support to move forward in one way or the other, having follow-up meetings, possibly with committees of the board, or at least one committee of the board, about what are the options, how can we work together to get to the end goal. The second question would be, speaking totally like off the top of my head, I think that just a blanket second question for full day kindergarten, if it's $700,000, let's just pick a number in the middle there, that's probably not what you would want, is what I think. I think that would be a hard persuasion for the full community to vote on. So it probably would be better if we get to that point, that we're working together to find out how can we get, how can we do some kind of phase-in or transition or combination of factors so that it isn't as significant a hit for the whole community, because there will be people who are, there are people who will oppose anything that you put out, including the second questions that we've had in recent years, that there have been resistance. So that's just part of the game plan and the landscape, and I think at that point is when your group would be probably most instrumental, when and if we get to that point.
With all due respect to your opinion that children don't need to know how to read when they go into first grade, I had that opinion too, because I remember years ago I didn't know how to read when I went into first grade, but in reality, kids here are repeating kindergarten because they don't know how to read. They're failing brain camp and they're going back, and then they're doing brain camp again. My son has kids that are a year older than him in first grade, and he laughs. He's like, oh, so-and-so is turning 8.
Well, what I'm saying, maybe I wasn't clear. What I'm saying is, it's
but
not.
I think the older people in our community that have children now in high school, I think the expectations have changed. And,
I agree.
And I think people don't understand the expectations are different now. Maybe we're setting unrealistic expectations of our children, but that's what's happened.
I totally agree with you, and maybe I misspoke, but what I mean to say is, having a full day kindergarten program does not mean that every kid is going to know how to read by the end of kindergarten, and that's okay. You could have a 12-hour kindergarten day, ages 3, 4, and 5, and there's still going to be some kids who don't know how to read by the time kindergarten ends. And I'm not an expert in early childhood matters, but I know that there's research about when kids do learn how to read. 3rd grade is a magic number for kids. You really want them on grade level by 3rd grade. There are dramatic changes between kindergarten and at the end of 2nd grade. I've got 2 kids myself, twin boys, very different paths toward their reading proficiency. And so my point is just simply that I don't think it's smart to use the argument that if we have a full day kindergarten program, every kid is going to learn how to read by the end of kindergarten. We're not going to need BSI. There's going to be less special ed classification rates. That's just not, I don't believe that's going to happen.
But I think part of what we have to do in kind of coming up with ideas to raise support in the community is help people understand that these expectations their children in high school are being held to now are actually being held to the younger children too. I mean, I'm not going to benefit from this because my last child's about to start kindergarten, but I care about the community. I care about my property values. I mean, if our school system goes down, that's not going to help Chatham. Is there some way we could implement trailers or something? I mean, I grew up in Florida. We all had trailers in our schools. So, I mean, is that something that can be done as kind of a middle ground for, not for the kindergartners to be in trailers, but some of the...
Believe it or not, they're very expensive trailers. They cost a lot of money up front. You have to hook them up into heating and other utilities. They have a lifespan at the end of which you have to figure out how to get rid of them. We've looked at trailers specifically at the high, more than any other place at the high school. And we didn't really think that they were, a good long-term solution. And for the cost, it's not, we didn't think it was cost effective versus actually building. So, and of course a lot of people don't like them.
Well, they're not
In
as
Chatham.
In Chatham.
Good job. I was gonna say, they're in Short Hills, they're in Short Hills, so.
Short Hills
We don't
has
roll
full-day
that way.
kindergarten.
I don't, is the referendum, is this what they've set, you know, is this what they're trying to pass, or is there still like some time to make tweaks or something?
No, this is it. This is going to the voters 3 weeks from Tuesday.
I mean, okay, so this is not, it's the moot point, but what happened to those other 2 classrooms in Southern that got cut? Because it seems like the cost, I mean, what's the cost difference for 2 extra classrooms? And it seems like there's a huge need for additional classrooms of various, you know, projects. And what I'm hearing now, it sounds like, you know, full day, even if we have these classrooms, like it's a toss-up if we get full day kindergarten or not.
There are some folks who feel that way. There are other folks who, you know, expressed wanting to trim down the referendum in a variety of ways. The board ultimately trimmed the referendum in several ways. One of them was taking out the Southern Boulevard classrooms, which relative to the Milton Avenue and Washington Avenue classrooms were more expensive per classroom. And that's just because of the way Southern is situated and the fact that we'd have to kind of expand into the hillside and like where the playground is, back where the current kindergarten classrooms are. So,
But I mean, just for my own curiosity's sake, what was the, do you know off the top of your head what the difference was? Or
They were about
what
1.2 million at one point.
they were a little bit more. They were more than that.
1.5. They were almost.
Yeah, I don't have off the top of my head the exact figure for the Southern classrooms. I can tell you, and some of you were at, you know, the public hearings. There was not a lot of public feedback in that direction about please keep this. So there were a few people who said that. It wasn't. Some people feel that way. Some people don't feel that way. Ultimately, the board decided to trim the referendum.
But those children would still get full-day kindergarten, they would just be shifted along.
Correct, if we go full-day kindergarten.
I
No, or we'd probably move other standalone programs. The idea would be, we've opened up a couple of classrooms at Southern, 2 in the past, since I've been superintendent, that are self-contained, you know, a handful of kids with special needs. Those are programs we can move fairly easily to another building, and that would free up space inside Southern.
So, I mean, I guess like what I would say, because, you know, we advocated, Julie and I had a lot of discussions. I had some discussions with a couple of the board members after, and though we really wanted the 8 classrooms, I will also tell you that through the discussions, you know, where I land on the auditorium from the commentary on like it wasn't considered how expensive it was, also has to do with talking to them about these classrooms at Southern, because they did really look at how expensive these classrooms were, and there was clearly some plan if they didn't get built and we really did need them. You know, they were not committing to a plan, but you know, there was enough question of putting something that was $1.5 million on the ballot this time that populations in that school have been declining, across the district have been declining, that something at that price tag might have been excessive at this time. And, you know, though I still think they should have built them, you know, I do think that, you know, they were open to other alternatives and also felt that if they were to get full-day kindergarten in some form in the district with these 6 classrooms, then it would be easy to go to the community and say, we have full-day kindergarten, now you have to pay the $1.5 million to build these classrooms, because now we need the space, because then you're in a situation like second grade classrooms where you just have to do it. You don't really have a choice, because it's not really an expansion, it's a program that's already built into the community. So, I mean, it was, you know, though not ideal, and we would like to shoot the moon, there did seem to be, if we were fighting, that the 6 classrooms could provide the potential to provide the programming. You know, and I don't say that with utmost confidence, but, you know, I do try to provide as much information as we can. And you know, one of the things I would say is, you know, the best thing that you guys can do is, like, come speak. Because, you know, they see Julia and I speaking over and over and over again. And, you know, they know that we have a 400-person base, but they need to feel our 400-person base, you know. And if it means that you're bringing your kids to the mics, or, you know, you need some help getting to these meetings, seeing different faces behind the movements. You know, Julia and I can get certain time at the microphone, but they've often already heard what we have to say. So they'll cut us to 3 minutes. You guys, if you get up and speak and they're a new face, they'll listen to you. They do want to hear what you have to say. So as we move forward, you know, that is truly the best thing that we can do to shift and to get claim over these 6 classrooms, because we will be vying for that space with music teachers and PTOs. Yeah. You know, and I also think from a messaging standpoint, you know, the message that, you know, kindergarten full day is to provide developmentally appropriate activities is the message that we want to send. You know, as a parent of someone who has a kindergartner who she's not going to read by the end. I met with Mrs. Quigley, and, you know, there's a question, send her or hold her. I will not tell you what we're deciding, but I will tell you that Mrs. Quigley just very matter-of-factly says all kids read between 5 and 8. They read when they read. You can't make them read. You can't, you know, cram sight words down there, you know. And so from, you know, a principal's standpoint, you know, that she is supportive of full-day kindergarten in discussions with us, and it is not necessarily for those academic skills. It is for providing developmentally appropriate time for Mrs. Volker to go into more detail and to elaborate and expand what they're offering, but, you know, the core basics are, you know, are what they are. So.